Buddy Sotello Esquire from San Francisco, California, and from the East Coast, New York City, Evan Ginzburg. Take it away, Evan.
That's right, 3,000 miles apart, coast to coast, and we are going to talk about wrestling and everything, not just wrestling, because we are adults. You guys have 17 kids between you. We have other interests besides wrestling, but the emphasis will be on wrestling. Tell us about our guest, buddy.
Thank you so much. If I could have anyone as a first guest for my show, I don't care. I don't care if it was Vince McMahon that we could book. I don't care if it was Hulk Hogan we could book. The guy that I would want the most as our first guest is the person that we have now, which is JJ Purdom, the voice of wrestling in Northern California, the best announcer and one of the best minds that I know of as far as booking and putting things together. We worked together first at Pro Wrestling Iron with people like Christopher Daniels, Nigel McGuinness, Mark Bison Smith, Donovan Morgan, and then we moved on to California Championship Wrestling, where guys like Brian Cage worked, and we had other notables like the poor Virgil Flynn, who passed a couple of years ago. So JJ is really an excellent booking mind, and one of the things that has been on a lot of people's thoughts have been what's gone on with Brawl for All and talking about the Brawl for All dark side of the ring, and one of the things I was thinking about is about booking, and it was a lot about booking, and I wanted to get some of both of your guys' thoughts about what you thought about that episode if you had a chance to watch it.
I haven't had an opportunity to watch it, but I want to take this opportunity to say thank you so much, Buddy and Evan, for having me on the show. I've been listening the last few episodes, and I am impressed. And Buddy, I want to agree with you. I am one of the greatest minds in wrestling. I knows it, you and I. So I'm trying to spread that around. Let people be aware.
So, but I mean, about the Brawl for All, and that it was crazy. It was a crazy idea by Vince Russo to try to get back at JBL and what he perceived as bullying type tactics against a lot of folks in the locker room, and a lot of guys got hurt. And one thing that we worked on a lot was the concept of booking and storylines and plot lines. And I know it means a lot to you, Evan, because it means you're a producer, and you've had to, also come up with concepts and a storyline and a theme to your movies, including 350 Days. So let's talk a little bit about like pretense and what it takes to build a storyline. So Evan, first I'd like to get some of your thoughts.
Any movie, any book, any show, any wrestling angle starts with an idea, and you build on that idea. And the idea for Brawl for All was insane. It was insane that they're going to have shoot matches, 300-pound tough guys, and either they're oblivious to the fact that they were going to get badly hurt, or the powers that be just didn't care that they were going to get hurt, because the whole point of wrestling is to make it look legitimate without hurting your opponent. The legends told me we prided ourselves on working light, not hurting our opponent. If you talk to Bret Hart, the star of 350 Days, he would tell you with great pride he wrestled thousands and thousands of matches for decades and never hurt anyone, which is one of the reasons he was so upset that his career ended abruptly, in the ring with Goldberg. The whole point is not to hurt someone. So to have a tournament where guys are getting hurt is utterly insane and possibly inhumane. What do you think, guys?
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the major issues, it's funny that Vince Russo now is trying to backpedal And now he's trying to point fingers and say that it was Vince's idea, when in the past he's taken full credit and responsibility for Brawl for All. The whole concept is you take these guys that are trained to perform an art, and then some of them are legitimately tough. I mean, I know a lot of them that are legitimately tough. Some of the names that stand out that are tough guys, Dr. Death Steve Williams, Haku, these guys are very, very tough. But when you put them in an environment where they're going to kill the mystique of the character, and I think that what the idea was to get somebody like Dr. Death Steve Williams over, and it absolutely destroyed the rest of his career.
Yeah, that's exactly what was said during the broadcast. That it was to put Steve Williams over, Dr. Death, and it utterly failed because the guy went face down like a ton of bricks. So the whole thing was insane, and I was barely watching WWE at the time. All I got out of that tournament was, wow, did they ever diminish Dr. Death Steve Williams? One of the greatest matches I ever saw live was Steve Williams against Dick Murdoch for the UWF belt. It was like a 5-star match. I'm like, how great is this guy? And they killed him dead. They killed him dead. Oh my God.
For whatever reason, wrestling and boxing are fascinated with each other. And both of them want to prove that they're a tougher sport than the other one. So whether you have Muhammad Ali getting in the ring with Antonio Inoki, which was just awful, wasn't it? I mean, the Inoki.
But that was a shoot. That's why it was awful.
Yeah, it was awful.
Yeah.
You had Roddy Piper in his boxing match with Mr. T.
That was god.
That was a car wreck with teeth in it, right? That was just bad beyond belief. So why with the WWE?
Don't forget the classic match between Mark Marrow and Arn Anderson.
When they had Mark Marrow doing his stuff. Yeah, absolutely. And even later, after this whole Brawl for All fiasco, we still had that whole deal with the Big Show when he was into the one punch, knockout thing, and he was in a feud with another boxer.
Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah, Mayweather. But that actually was a brilliant angle that was played out perfectly. If anybody takes wrestling and takes it to another sport, like a Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather does that and has done that in the past with boxing. And I thought that kind of worked perfectly together, the way that they did that angle. Probably one of the best angles Big Show was ever involved in.
One of 57 other face turn and heel turn. Yeah, exactly. But it's just weird that boxing and wrestling just seem like they have to interact with each other over X number of years. But the Brawl for All was obviously the biggest mistake of them all. I mean, we've talked about some pretty notable ones that were pretty awful, but that one was the worst. And I don't know. I don't think we'll ever be done with wrestling intersecting with boxing over time. I think
I'll tell you something that goes back 50 or so years that many of the fans won't know. There was a memo that the NWA sent around. Please book Joe Louis, the former heavyweight boxing champ, as a referee in major arenas. Why major wrestling arenas? Because he had tax debt to the government that was choking him. And the wrestling promoters took pity on him, unlike the boxing promoters who spit him out. So you would see Joe Louis main eventing at Madison Square Garden, and other major arenas around the country because the wrestling promoters, really looked out for the guy. And Primo Carnero, who walked out of boxing with nothing, made good money in wrestling. So wrestling saved a lot of these guys.
Yeah, and it's going to keep happening. There's going to be more people from the boxing world and now the MMA world trying to make their way into wrestling. Look at what's happening with guys like Tyson Fury, who had a phenomenal payday in Saudi Arabia not that long ago through the WWE. And he's somebody who takes the pageantry of wrestling into the boxing sport and has made a crap ton of money through it. And that's the same thing that Mayweather did. They are doing wrestling better than wrestling is right now with the way that they're building prize fights.
Well, a lot of it.
Deontay Wilder shouldn't have won that 40-pound monstrosity into the ring against Fury because he claimed it sucked the life out of him. I think it's just a poor excuse, but anyway.
Look, the Ultimate Warrior can tell you all you need is some face paint and a little bit of arm ties. You don't need the 40 pounds of armor. You can just go, down to the ring and Ultimate Warrior yourself out and a little bit of will also help, get you over that 40-pound armor stuff. That's crazy. That was a crazy excuse. But when JJ and I were working together, and this was one of the things I wanted to bring up, was we helped develop a character. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed working with JJ on in California Championship Wrestling. And when you work indie, you get the chance to sometimes change the talent a little bit, and you make suggestions to guys, and you think of guys and how they could work into the storyline. Now, I met a guy by the name of Lance Pecor, who was known as Otis the Gimp, and he used to wear a mask and do unspeakable things to an inflatable sheet to the audience. And the audience in where he was at, which was SPW, Supreme Pro Wrestling in Sacramento, they ate it up. They were great. But in California Championship Wrestling, we were trying for a more 80s style family-ish kind of product that Otis the Gimp wouldn't work at all for that group. And so I met Otis after one of the shows, and I saw him without his mask on, and I said, he looks a little bit like, could be like a trucker kind of guy. And I brought the idea over to JJ, and JJ said, oh, well, you know what? What was it? Your son had been playing the video game Mother Truckers or something like that?
Bad Mother Truckers, yeah.
Bad Mother Truckers. And so why don't we come up with the name Mother Truckin' Otis and make him like this beloved trucker type guy?
He essentially went from being a character that worked well with that Gimp thing that he was doing. He's such a really sweet guy, but he was doing this character in front of bar shows. He was doing all these things in front of very adult crowds, and we took him and said, we basically want to make you a trucker version of Hillbilly Jim. And he said, oh, I don't know if that would work. That's not really my thing. He ended up doing it, and it got over like $1 million. I've never seen anything get over so well. So he took the initiative to come up with baseball hats and T-shirts and signing 8x10s. He made way more money on merchandise than he ever made from us paying him to be a performer. And he took that character to a lot of different organizations all throughout California, Oregon, and Washington. And as far as I know, he still occasionally wrestles under that character, and he doesn't use the other ones. So I think it's pretty successful. He didn't make $1 million with it or anything, but he was basically our lovable Hillbilly Jim redneck character that everybody kind of fell in love with. He never had to say one word. He just came out and all smiles and that trucker thing, Mother Truckin' Otis. And it's people in my town that I live in. We promoted a lot of events here. People still come up to me every once in a while and talk about the wrestling events that were done here in town. And gosh, why can't you bring back wrestling? Oh, I remember Mother Truckin' Otis. That guy was hilarious. Or, and some of the other various characters that they mention from time to time. But Otis is the one that seemingly resonates with the people in this redneck cow town that I live in.
Johnny Valiant used to say to me, fans need to understand who the character is within a few seconds of walking out. This guy's the good Indian, this guy's the bad Indian. This guy's the good cowboy, this guy's the bad cowboy. You hear indie wrestlers today go through this elaborate speech. Well, I'm a tweener and blah, 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 blah. And no, they all look like third-rate, Steve Austins. So you got a character like you guys created here. Boom, he walks out and people know who he is. It works.
Yeah, immediately. And he didn't have to rely on the 70s, come on, guys, get behind me, come on. He walked out and immediately you knew what he was all about. You could see it. Character was just exuding from him. And for the first time, and I think by that point he had been doing it for 7 or 8 years, for the first time in his career, everybody started talking about, man, that guy's really got charisma, you know.
Yeah.
He was always the same guy, but it just was sometimes, you see, like, let's say Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler. A role finds a person, not a person finds the role. Does that, because when I saw The Wrestler, when I was done watching The Wrestler, I said, if ever there was a guy that was born to play a role and have a role just come right into his lap, and hey, he worked to make that happen, but it was the perfect role for him.
Well, I'll tell
Mickey
you
Rourke
what.
as The Wrestler was just amazing.
I'll tell you what happened, and not everybody knows. I was associate producer on The Wrestler, and we spent the weekend with Nicolas Cage because we were having trouble getting the funding off of Mickey's name at the time because he was not at the peak of his box office powers in 2007 or 8. We finally did the film in 2008. What people don't realize is it took 7 years from start to finish, 5 or 6 different scripts, etc., so on, and of course to raise the funding. So we're with Nicolas Cage, who at the time, was in his early 40s. He looked healthy. He was in good shape, and he looked too healthy. Okay, he didn't look the part. And I'm sitting with Darren Aronofsky, and Darren's like, yeah, Nicolas Cage is, at the time he was big box office, and he goes, but Mickey's the right guy. Mickey's the right guy. And Darren's an artist, and Darren went with his heart, and it was the right choice. And Mickey won the Golden Globe Award. Mickey was up for the Oscar at the Academy Awards. And when I spoke to him, I said, after the fact, I said, what'd you think of the film? Upon completion, he goes, I can't watch it. It's too painful. He goes, it reminds me of me. You understand? Because when you go from the top, he was boxing himself. He was boxing. He got a concussion in the ring. So his star had diminished at the time, and The Wrestler brought him back. And in the next, his real payoff, none of us got rich from The Wrestler. His real payoff was Iron Man 2. We got $1 million for that. That was really the payoff of The Wrestler.
Yeah, I don't know what you thought about this, Evan, but I just want to spitball an idea right now. But you could probably get Nicolas Cage for a really small fee in The Wrestler 2. I mean, let's just think about that. Let's get that ball rolling, because I mean, it just writes itself.
You're laughing, but you could get major names if you have them for one day. You could get a major name for like $50,000. So you see big names doing cameos, and then of course you use the names to sell the movie and get distribution and everything. So it depends who it is, of course. I'm not saying Nicolas Cage is going to work for $50,000, but there are name stars who would, because it's a quick payday. Just like in wrestling, guy will do an indie show. You throw him enough and he'll do it. Yeah.
I saw enough guys doing backyard shows with a bunch of in-trade performers because, well, hey, they gave me $300.
$300. Yeah. Very glamorous wrestling.
Right.
Yeah, $300, but usually also an open bar tab somewhere somewhere in a local watering hole.
Typically, they'd get 2 hot dogs. So that pays for itself.
Yes. But one of the things that JJ was really good at when we were working with each other in CCW was telling a storyline over a long period of time. I mean, the payoff that we did with the Sotello Syndicate, that had the turn of Vinny Massaro on Big Ugly, was one of the great, storylines that I know of, in Northern California in a long time. And that was... I know that's featuring local folks that aren't necessarily all that well known to the East Coast folks, but still, I'd like to know for you, Evan, what you would consider as a good indie wrestling storyline that you followed that you thought was really well told, maybe featuring some big names out on the East Coast. But what do you think are the things that make a long-term storyline work, as opposed to right now where we see Vince just can't even stand a storyline to last more than maybe like a 1 month arc or even a weekend?
You have to care. First of all, you have to care. We all knew Daniel Bryan, aka Bryan Danielson, and he
Hey,
comes
he
in.
worked at APW. He was head
Yeah, that's
trainer
what I'm
out there.
saying. Yeah, I know you guys work with them. So, he comes into WWE. He's smaller than most of these guys. He's not as big a name as most of these guys. And he's climbing, climbing, climbing. They're beating him down. He's climbing back up. Boom, boom, boom. And next thing you know, he's fighting for the title. And it's a true, like, David versus Goliath underdog story. You cared. And I could say 99% of WWE content, I don't care whatsoever. Doesn't matter to me, win, lose, draw. Doesn't matter to me if they cancel the thing the day of. So when Daniel Bryan came into WWE, that was magic. That was magic. I think Dustin and Cody and Dustin, I think that worked recently because there was emotion involved. But I just think the vast amount of matches today, they don't put the time and effort in, and it's just throwing two guys in the ring. And WWE, they just throw 8 guys in the ring, 6 guys in the ring. It's meaningless. They just slap it together, and you go, I could have booked. If I had that talent on a 3-hour show, what I could have booked if you took the time. Some of the greatest wrestlers in the world are squandered in WWE. Anyway, you guys are the bookers. You talk.
Well, we saw a lot of that when we were doing shows. A lot of times in California, what you typically would see is a lot of spot shows. So every show would have matches that didn't make any sense, that followed no continuity. We were trying to do something for TV. So the way we were filming everything was we were filming it for Comcast On Demand. It was a brief time. We probably shouldn't have been on television as the quality of the show wasn't the greatest. What we were putting out wasn't great. We were the first ones in our area to get television, and it was broadcast throughout the whole Bay Area. And so the story that I was trying to tell with it, with the continuity, was trying to have an arc that told the story for a full year. And then with a big climax was able to carry us through the next year. What we did for the first year, it morphed and it changed as we went along. Things would happen. One wrestler decides they can't make it, or they're in a car accident, or they're sick, or they just don't feel like coming for whatever reason, or they retired out of nowhere. We would make changes on the fly, and I felt like what is the audience that we are catering to buying? So things would change. The story that we told, there was a tag team that was well known throughout our area. It was 2 guys, Big Ugly JD Bishop and Vinny Massaro. These 2 guys teamed together for several years, held tag team championships in half a dozen different organizations throughout the Northern California area and in Oregon. And what we did was Vinny was our champion. He won the championship. Vinny Massaro won the title in a tournament at our first show. And in the finals of that, Buddy Sotello was managing the guy Adam Thornstowe, who now works for Impact. He was managing Adam Thornstowe, who at that time was known as the trendsetter. He hadn't become the Rock Legend Scum yet. And Adam was unsuccessful. Vinny wins the title. And for the next year, Buddy Sotello would take different characters throughout the year trying to wrest the title away from Vinny Massaro. So all year long, Buddy's sending in challengers galore. He's got a 7-foot masked guy, Paul Isadora under a hood, went by Mr. Massacre, all these different guys. The tag teams, he had the tag team champions under his care, as well as the West Side champion. It was our middle card title. And Vinny Massaro came up a couple of months before the big 1-year anniversary show that we were doing. We called Super Slam. Right before he broke his wrist doing a martial arts deal where he was training, and he broke his wrist and he wasn't going to be able to perform. So I had to change stuff up. So what we did was, instead of him defending the title that night, we put the title on the person he was going to wrestle, and then forced that person, Rick Luxury, to defend the title against Big Ugly, Vinny Massaro's best friend. And so Big Ugly won the title in the ladder match. He beat Rick Luxury, so he walked out with the title. And in a cast, Massaro comes out and does the whole thing where he thanks him and congratulates him. And then a couple of months later, we had an event where for the first time ever, the two of them, because Massaro never actually lost the championship, is now going to have a one-on-one match with Big Ugly for the title. So they have a very nice 15, 20-minute babyface match, very evenly. I mean, they were really laying their stuff in. Had a fantastic match. And right at the end, Sotello comes out. Buddy Sotello's got a whole army of guys, including Mr. Massacre, the big mass 7-footer, and a couple of other guys. And it looks like they are going to attack Massaro yet again and try to screw Massaro over. But instead, they help Massaro win the title. And then Massaro becomes the crown jewel of the Sotello Syndicate, turning on his friend, wiping his feet on him. People were throwing trash and were absolutely upset. And it led into the next little bit of us having now the Sotello Syndicate with Massaro as the crown jewel, with Buddy running around trumpeting that he's got all the champions and that, you know, he rules the world, and that everything was a ploy. Everything was built up on, they were planning everything against that piece of trash, Big Ugly JD Bishop. And it was just really, really well told. And it culminated in a steel cage match, the first time that our company and also my town has ever seen a steel cage match. And a lot of people came out in force to see that steel cage match where Big Ugly won the title back, won the title from Massaro. And then afterwards, I let Massaro take over the booking, and he came up with an angle where he had problems with his mind and lost his mind or something.
Unfortunately, that's when we crashed and burned relatively badly. But when JJ was in charge, we were drawing like crowds of 400, 500 people. It was actually a really, really wonderful set of and I think a lot of it had to do, people really felt, because we're doing monthly shows, they really wanted to see what was going to happen next. We were able to convince the fans that if you came to the show, you would be seeing a continuing storyline that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And in a small town like that, that really had a lot of appeal, because live entertainment, especially as we see nowadays, is harder to find than ever. So that, I think, made the indie element of it work so well. And we don't see as much of that going on these days. What's your thoughts about that, Evan?
I think these shows just come and go. I mean, these promotions, 99% of them don't make it, and they'll run every 3 months, every 4 months, and they're totally obsessed with it. But you can't even assume the fans sitting there were at the last show, because months have gone by. So there's no continuity, and I always tell these indie promoters, keep it simple. Have 7 or 8 matches instead of 12, 13, 14. Don't let every guy on the mic, and build towards your main event, and keep it all simple, sweet, short and sweet. 2.5, 3 hours, not 4, 5, 6 hours. And I just think it's almost obsessive, where the promoters just live and breathe it, and hire a publicist, take out commercials on public access or whatever, local cable, I should say. Take out commercials and fill your seats and publicize instead of agonize over every minute detail, because inevitably it doesn't work out. It just doesn't work out, except for the few guys who figure it out and do sold shows. Those are the guys who make money.
Well, yeah, and people have to understand that if you're working for a Fed or something like that, you got to get your hands dirty. I mean, you got to go out there and you got to sell tickets yourself. I mean, you can't just sit there and think that, people are going to come to the show just because you put up one poster somewhere in a dark corner of town. I mean, you have to get out there and press the flesh. You need to, get your family to show up. You got to get your cousins to show up. You got to get your the people where you work at, to come see the show. It's amazing.
Sometimes you can do everything right. You can do everything you're saying right now, buddy. You can put out every flyer all over town, every gas station, every convenience store, everything. You can do all of that and still not pull a crowd for whatever reason. It's a fickle thing to try to pull people in for a live event. But you just have to try to cover all bases. Now, all anybody ever does is just advertise on Facebook.
Exactly.
or Twitter. And I don't think that's the way to go either.
Well, the
No, I
first
mean-
thing, the first thing that they have to do is look at a calendar and go, hey, this is Easter weekend. This would not be ideal to run. Hey, this is a Jewish holiday. Hey, this is June where we have weddings and graduations, or don't put it. I once saw a guy lose 35 grand. He put a show and convention up against the first game of the World Series in the town where the World Series was. Okay, I mean everybody was home watching the World Series, and I would not run in the dead of winter because you risk snowstorms or horrendous weather. Look at a calendar. Step one, really.
The other thing that I'd also say is that don't chase the talent. Let the talent find you. We found in running California Championship Wrestling that we were able to put some pretty good talent out there without having to hire the big name. I mean, big names found us every once in a while, but by and large, we didn't ever hire any really big names or mark out on trying to get, the Young Bucks, for example. I had a friend of mine actually in Petaluma run a show with Eric Young and the Young Bucks on it. It was a great show, but it cost him, around like 20 grand to do. And he tried to fill up a giant arena with it, and only 400 people showed. 400 people is a good crowd for an indie crowd, but you're never going to pay off guys like the Young Bucks and Eric Young for something along those lines.
I think a lot of promoters have no sense of math. Okay, so let's say you have 20 guys on a card, which is conservative because sometimes you have more than that. Okay, you have 20 guys on the card and you draw 100, which is generous because sometimes you draw less than that. Okay, so 20 into 100 means these guys drew on average 5 guys each. Why? Because none of them are publicizing it. They go, by the way, I'm wrestling tonight. That's not publicity. Buddy sees I relentlessly promote. Relentlessly, okay? We put out a movie, 350 Days. It took us 6 years of blood, sweat, and tears to work on this. I'm going to promote this thing every day of my life. So if you have an indie promoter who's not willing to do anything beyond, hey, I'm wrestling tonight, why do you need him? Why do you need him? Get some guy who's just as good, who will publicize and bring 10 of his friends, relatives, 15 of his coworkers. Those are the guys you need. I mean, most of these guys are comparable as far as talent. I mean, it does vary, but generally on the local indie level. So get guys who will actually promote and draw. Am I wrong?
No, entirely right. That's one thing that I had Virgil, the old WWE star, try to hit me up and try to get booked on a show. I had Honky Tonk Man reaching out to me, and I had no use for those guys. And it's not that they don't have some value somewhere, but I knew when they're hitting me up at the last moment and saying, hey, I'm in town doing a show at BTW in Newark, right down the road from you the night before, and you won't have to pay as much for me. There's no benefit in me not being able to promote them as being there. Not that I'd want either of them anyway, but why would I put the money out when they're not going to put enough money in butts to cover paying their fees? So some of that kind of stuff doesn't make any sense to me. And I've had the issue with a lot of those guys throwing it up on Twitter and saying, hey, I'm working tonight over here in bum crap wherever, and that's not going to pull anybody in. You've got to be all over it. Man, I can't wait. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I get a chance to get in the ring with X wrestler, and I'm going to beat the crap out of this guy. You guys want to see a fight? You better make it to Newman, because I'm going to rip this guy's head off and crap down his throat. Talk about it. Talk about it like it's a big deal.
Exactly.
Make it something.
Yeah. Or as the promoter, as a courtesy, you could give a legend a free table, come on down, sell your gimmicks, and advertise them that way. Where there's no outlay of expense if they're not willing to promote it, of course.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just they want the crowd to just be there. They don't want to work for a crowd to be there. They just want the crowd to show up. And promoting is hard work. I mean, that's one of the things that I think most people find is probably of all the things in wrestling, promoting is probably the least glamorous part of the entire business. Other than paying folks. The getting out there and convincing people to advertise with your federation, to get people to show up and to do what they say they're going to do, and to all the times that we had to negotiate for bottles of water and stuff like that. With CCW, it was very hard, and not as a lot of people take for granted what Vince McMahon already has in place. Whereas when you have to do it all yourself, it's not nearly as easy to do. What do you guys thought?
Nor is it glamorous, and the vast amount of times people lose significant amounts of money. I mean, I've seen guys lose their wives, their girlfriends, their houses. I've seen guys end up in welfare hotels after promoting and losing small fortunes of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I've seen it time and time again. I've been around this forever. And another part of the problem, again, going back to the wrestlers, and I love wrestlers. Some of my best friends are wrestlers, but when you bring in 7 comps, oh, this is my wife and my kids and my sister-in-law and my sister-in-law's friend, blah blah blah. You're not helping. People should break down and support it. It's not expensive an indie wrestling ticket. Don't have your hand out for a comp. Help the promoter. You know how tough it is.
Oh yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And then of course the comp folks want free T-shirts and
Yes.
a bag of popcorn as well. So the hand that's out, it just continues to stay out. It never comes back in. But that's something that I think people get so excited about, like doing their first show. But it's when you're doing the 5th show and the 12th show and the 20th show. Can you keep that enthusiasm going? And it's amazing how hard it is to keep that up. And I think when you have a storyline like what JJ was talking about, you sort of have that to look forward to keep you kind of adhering to when you have the good times and the bad times. And you can think that there's a larger level of what you're trying to get to and what you're trying to achieve. You're not trying to do it one show at a time. I think that helps keep a federation together, as opposed to these folks who do 2 shows and then they're done.
So here's my big question for you guys, and be honest. So you guys are waxing nostalgic. You had great times together, and you booked some great wrestling, and you have very fond memories, and you made good friendships. But was it worth the blood, sweat, tears, possible loss of money to have done all of this?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I don't know what Russ's answer is going to be. And I'm sorry if I'm stepping on your toes, but no. My marriage almost fell apart. I gave everything that I had to that company, and I shouldn't have. For what? I have nothing to show for it. Do I have some memories? Sure, they're great. A couple of pictures, some videos that I can look back on in a few years. Great. I lost no money. It wasn't my money that was doing it, but I put so much into it with the promoting that if somebody called for a ticket at 11 o'clock at night, it was me that was answering the phone. It was me that was haggling with people over, the deals they can get if they buy multiple tickets and things like that. It was me that was dealing with the wrestlers not showing up at the show. And it was me dealing with the stress that I was taking home to my wife, and at the time, just one kid. So no, I would not do it again like that at all. I would prefer to just show up, do my part, help promote an event that I'm going to be on, announce, whether it's ring announcing or commentary. But I would never do what I did before, because I lost so much of my life to try to promote an indie wrestling show that in the grand scheme of things didn't really matter.
Wow. Wow.
And
JJ
I
is an
have the
honest
exact
man, buddy.
opposite experience. I absolutely loved it. First of all, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys, and we wouldn't be doing this show if I hadn't done those sort of things. It was a bucket list element of my life that it's, when you say whether I should have done it or I shouldn't have done it, that's not the point. I was going to do it because that was something that I felt destined to do. I would have always sat through my life saying, God, what if I had ever done something like this? Wrestling has always been a passion of mine. Being on the outside of wrestling and wanting inside wrestling was something that motivated me to do some really stupid stuff, like having somebody throw me over the top rope and having the guys who were supposed to catch me underneath the rope miss and have me fall to the ground and really hurt myself pretty badly.
Yeah, as I recall, I booked that. I'm sorry about that.
It is true.
You never sent me a
wasn't
bill.
really you. You booked it, but it was Vinny who really pushed me to do it. It was Vinny who really told me that it was going to work, and it didn't. And that was pretty painful, man. But I still would do it over again because, well, I wouldn't do that move over again, but I'd still do all the other things that we've done because to me, it's something that separate. People lead dull, monotonous, boring, everyday lives. And I can tell people that I'm a lawyer and they shirk away. I can tell people I'm a computer consultant and they'll say, I've got this problem with my computer. When I tell people that I've been a pro wrestling manager, people's eyes light up and they do want to talk to me about that experience more than about that than anything else in my entire life. So it is hard to... Fame is the thing that pushes people to do this sort of thing, whether it's music or whether it's art or whether it's wrestling. I mean, people do it because they want their piece of fame. They want to touch an audience. They want people to boo for them. They want people to cheer for them. And for people to do that motivates people, just like that's what you got. That is what you touched your finger on in The Wrestler. That is that emotion where people will do whatever it takes to get the crowd behind them and to get the feeling of the crowd behind them. I felt that. I had those things, especially when we did the stuff with the syndicate and the payoffs that we did for the Super Slam and all that stuff. And when I got over and had the belts in my hand and I was just torturing the fans and having them just throw stuff at me and they booed me incessantly, I couldn't get enough of that. That was the kind of payoff that I'd searched my entire life for. And that's one of the things that when you take that away from wrestlers, they go nuts. They go to drugs. They go to, drinking. They unfortunately commit suicide because there's nothing else that can replace that kind of feeling once you've felt that from manipulating a crowd and making them feel the way you want them to. That's why actors do what they do. That's why musicians do what they do. That's why any artist does what they do. I felt that, and that was the kind of thing that God knows, if I ever can feel it again, I'll do whatever stupid thing it takes to make that happen.
Well, I don't want you to think that I hate it or anything like that. I love what we did. I don't love that.
No, I understand. You did a lot. You did a lot more because it was in your hometown. You sacrificed a lot more than I had to at the time. So I understand.
I was not very good at delegating, so I tried to do everything, and so that's what I'm talking about. There's just a lot of pain with a lot of the love that I tried to put into it. I absolutely love pro wrestling. I always have, and I always will. When I was running that company, when we were doing all of that, there was a time when I started to kind of hate it, and kind of despise it. And I've seen what it's become, with WWE, and there are moments that I can still enjoy, but a lot of that love went away for a long time. It's totally back. I love wrestling, and I'll always be a wrestling fan, and I'll always try to be involved in some way, shape, or form. But I don't think I'd ever want to promote the way that I did because I just gave up too much, and there just wasn't much of me left over afterwards.
And let me just give the truth is somewhere in the middle. I go into the ring as a heel manager for Titan Championship Wrestling, various indies on the East Coast, and I love it. It's a rush. get on the mic, antagonize the fans, it's great. But I'm not losing thousands of dollars. I'm not losing a wife. I'm not losing a house. I'm not devoting 24/7 to this. And, to me, it's a fun thing I do on the side. And I get it. I totally get it. But I do think there's a point where with some promoters, it gets obsessive. And I said this on a previous show. When a promoter said to me, Evan, I've lost money on 18 out of 20 shows, but I'm going to keep going. Part of me is like, you're insane. You're utterly insane. But I do get the passion, and I love wrestling, but I also hate wrestling because I see how it's destroyed some of my friends. I've seen guys who sold out Madison Square Garden, friends, end up pushing a broom. Why? To get health benefits, to get a pension, because they weren't taken care of by a billionaire, even though they devoted, thousands of nights of their lives as a quote unquote independent contractor. How despicable. So I have a love-hate relationship with the whole thing. And I get what both of you guys are saying. And it's great that you guys are both so honest. I mean, not everybody is. And some people cross the line into just crazy. They'll lose everything. They'll lose everything.
And I say all of that as I'm actually in the process of talking about promoting again.
Okay.
I've got a little bit of crazy in me too.
We all have to. You can't be involved in this business unless you're crazy. Period. I mean, to some degree, because none of it makes sense, right? You stand up and think about it in that sense. But that never mattered to me. I've always loved the concept of it and the whole fighting arts level of it. To be involved in that in some way just compels me, and I think it compels both of you guys. Otherwise, you wouldn't have done all the nutty things that you guys have done in your lives as well. On top of it, and for you to spend 6 years making a movie about wrestling shows how much you'd have to be devoted on it. I mean, that's a big thing right there.
6 years to make it and 2 years to promote it, and still promoting it. People have no idea what goes into making a quality movie. And, I'm a fan of Dark Side of the Ring. However, there's a big difference doing episodic TV. You're not putting 6 years into this. Somebody was asking me my honest opinion on the Brawl for All, show. And I said, if I were a casual viewer, I would have looked at that as Bart Gunn was utterly dismissed and his career was ended right after that, and that was not the case. He went to Japan for many years, was very successful. None of that was addressed. So, there's limitations in a 45 or so minute format, and you have more of a luxury if you're doing an hour 50 movie like we did to really tell a more complete story. So, Dark Side of the Ring is quality work, but there are limitations in that format. The Brody episode, I'm like, hey, they should have somehow found a way to talk to more of those guys. It was very limited, the perspectives that you were getting, in that episode. So I have mixed emotions about it, but for the most part, I enjoy it and I watch it, and I'm happy that it's on.
Well, yeah, and they did talk about Vic Grimes in the New Jack episode. And I did want to say that to me, Vic Grimes was actually a really nice guy. I'm surprised they sort of portray him as kind of a guy that almost killed New Jack with that one botched move, which, happens. But Vic Grimes was always really nice and respectful to me. And in fact, when I had a really botched move that I was working on with Vinny Massaro, where I kind of pushed Vinny in the way of Nate Miyake during a dive out, and Vinny wanted to kick my ass for that. Vic Grimes was the guy who came in between Vinny and myself and said, hey, the guy's just learning to be a manager, and you're in a better shape to take a dive out than he is. Just look at him. So, Vic Grimes was always a pretty nice guy to me, and I think they did. I was surprised that they didn't really talk to him in that episode.
Yeah, he would have been perfect to talk to get his perspective, because they said repeatedly he never called New Jack after he heard him, even though it was accidental. He never called. So he did not come off well in that episode. So, of course, go to the guy and interview him. I mean, that's filmmaking 101.
I could tell you he more than likely, and this is just from a couple of years ago, he more than likely declined to be on camera, as he had gained a lot of weight and he was already a very large guy.
That's a different story, sure.
He had become very, very extremely large.
Okay.
And as I recall from a couple of people, he had become bedridden at one point. I don't know if that's still the case now, but he was very large.
You could still get a quote or a soundbite or something. I mean, because he did not come off well from that episode.
And that's not who he is.
I like the guy.
Yeah, my personal experience with him is that's not who he is, and that, as you talk about, it's kind of unfair to put that on him without him saying something. But obviously, he gave some permission for them to be able to show that footage. I mean, if he had said no to that, I don't know if they would have been able to show it. So, but
that comes down to who owns the footage, not to the wrestler.
Could be, or I don't know. I think he'd have some ability to say that he would want to not be involved in the episode, because we had when they did the one about the mass transit, he was able to at least put in there that his family didn't want to cooperate with the making of that footage. But anyway, one final thing, because we have a few minutes left. I'd like to talk just a little bit, because New Jack also focused a lot on ECW, and that was a phenomenon that you had on the East Coast, but out here in the West, we always sort of observed it from the outside looking in, because there were never any ECW shows here in California. So what was it like? What was the feeling like to have ECW grow and become what it was on the East Coast for you, Evan?
Well, I was there in Philly for the ECW house shows at the legendary arena, which is basically a dump. But the atmosphere, the heat was unbelievable. And when you saw the gangsters come out, the heat was off the chart. Public Enemy, all these guys. I mean, it was great. And to me, the greatest thing ECW ever did was when they had Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko do that 1 hour TV draw, or whatever. I believe it was a draw. It was an hour. I mean, that was art. I think where they kind of veered off in the wrong direction was when they went to the third flaming table. Get the tables. I mean, yeah, that became predictable. And it was the law of diminishing values. I mean, by that point. And it almost got tired, and I just think it ran out of gas at some point, and obviously it ran out of money, So, but I'll tell you, when you were physically there, like Terry Funk versus Sabu, oh my God, it was like some of the greatest things I've ever seen in 46 years of attending. So, I'm a purist. I mean, I love Harley Race and Nick Bockwinkel and Billy Robinson. But when you have a great brawl like Terry Funk and Sabu, I mean, what more can you ask for? I mean, it was tremendous. I have great memories of ECW. Yeah, and they brought in the luchadors.
In California, I think I think a lot of us wanted to find the next ECW, but in the California side of things, and it never really developed. There was never that kind of an equivalent of a California style ECW. We had XPW, but all that really turned into was just pure garbage wrestling, and a lot of guys got hurt. Your thoughts, JJ?
I saw a couple of XPW shows, and it was ECW light. And it was horrible, absolutely disgusting. Whereas some of the stuff from ECW you can look back on nostalgically, like Evan's talking about. There were Terry Funk and Sabu Some of the stuff with Shane Douglas, there was some amazing angles and great wrestling moments. XPW was like a garbage variety version of that, and it never worked. It was run by Rob Black. He was a porn star guy. He was all into promoting porn movies, and he had some really, really nasty porn ladies that were acting as valets. Yeah. Yeah. So, in fact, I know a lot of guys who worked with them. And they loved their experience. They made a whole lot of money, and coincidentally enough, XPW had like a little reunion show. I want to say 2008, and they are the reason that we put the stake in the company that we were doing, CCW. The guy who was promoting it was a huge fan of Howard Stern, and one of the guys, Vinny Massaro, was a guest on Howard Stern, and at the time, he was the guy who was booking our shows, as well as he was given the building to be able to have a training academy that he was never charged one dime for. He was training 4 or 5 different people and was making money on that, was not being charged one dime, with the proviso, help us by getting talent to work for cheaper. And he went on Howard Stern with his amazingly gorgeous wife. And Vinny, at the time, wasn't a great-looking dude by his standards and by most people's standards. Mm-hmm. And he repped an XPW shirt. They were having a reunion show, and XPW gave him a shirt and said, we'll give you $100 to wear this shirt on the Howard Stern show. And the guy who was promoting the CCW stuff, who had given Vinny so much, said, I can't believe it. That was such a blow to me and to my ego that I'm doing everything I can for this guy. And he goes on a nationally syndicated show like Howard Stern, and he doesn't want to wear a CCW shirt. He's like, dude, I would have given him $200-$300 easily. It was not about.
You could have just mentioned CCW for like 2 seconds and just say, I also run a pro wrestling school in Newman called CCW, and that would have been enough, and it would have taken 5 seconds, but it was too much for him to do on Howard Stern, the biggest show that you could possibly be on.
But he got $100.
It's sometimes the smallness of people's mentality and what they're thinking really cripples what the bigger things that these independent feds want to do, because everyone is thinking on such a tiny little level that you're not able to work in a bigger concept or make the shows be a bigger, the federation be a bigger deal, because nobody's thinking bigger than that.
Let me take this to another level. I've had indie wrestlers say to me, Evan, I've had 16 concussions, but I'm coming back. I'm coming back. And I'll go, why? Why? You have a wife and kids. Don't you want to know who they are down the road? I mean, obsession is not just for the promoters. Some of the wrestlers really, take it in the wrong direction. And I've seen agents who, book their childhood heroes lose fortunes of money as well on the autograph circuit. Time and time again. They'll have a basement full of signed 8x10s that they can't move, but they'll lose thousands and thousands of dollars on appearances, many of these agents, because, hey, I spent the day with my childhood hero and he likes me. It's like, well, was it worth him liking you for the $5,000 that you lost? I mean, it's a crazy business. It's like, and again, I have a love-hate relationship with it, which is why this show is going to be different than the typical, let's overanalyze every match on Raw. That's not what we do here.
No, right, and I'm very proud of what we've accomplished with our show. I think it's been a really wonderful experience having you on our show today, JJ. We'll look forward to having you as a guest in the future. And
I appreciate that, buddy. Really... Thank you, Evan, for having me on the show. Thank you. Evan, just again, I'm going to want that executive producer credit if we do The Wrestler 2 with Nick Cage.
Yes.
Just keep me in mind.
We'll get Michael Bay involved.
But I don't see it happening.
We'll get Michael Bay involved, and we'll get some robots, and we'll have explosions, and we'll have motorcycles running through the ring, and
Zombies. Zombies are marketable.
Zombies and some dinosaurs. It'll be great. It'll be great. Anyway, guys, thank you so much, and thank you so much for today's program. All right, good day.